This is Paul Garcia of ProjectSpurs.com bringing a quick salary cap video of the San Antonio Spurs' cap situation heading into free agency July 1st. Let's go ahead and begin with where their current salary stands with all cap holds and exceptions applied. Right now, the Spurs have a team salary, of $146.8 million. Now, in order to have access to the non-tax mid-level exception and the biannual exception, the Spurs need to make a few moves here to get access to those two exceptions. Let's go ahead and begin by getting rid of the tax exception. The first move they need to make is they need to renounce Tony Parker's cap hold of $23.1 million. Next move is renounce Joffrey Laverne's $1.8 million cap hold because he's reportedly going to sign with Fenerbahce overseas. David Lee, he retired, so we're going to go ahead and renounce his cap hold. Okay, but now by making those few moves, the Spurs are now under the apron of $129 million, which gives them access to the mid-level exception, which is worth $8.5 million, and the biannual exception. These two exceptions can be used to either sign outside free agents, or they can be used to re-sign some of their own free agents, whether it's a restricted free agent or an unrestricted. So now let's go through the each player and where they stand on the roster, especially coming into this free agency July 1st. Tony Parker, once they renounce his cap hold, they have a few different ways that they can re-sign him if he wants to return and they want to keep him. They can open up some cap space, which does not look ideal. They probably have to make some trades to do that. They can sign him to the veteran minimum, or they can use one of these two exceptions, the mid-level exception or the biannual exception. They can use the full or part of those exceptions to re-sign Parker. Now, it's unknown exactly where his market's at and what kind of deal he and the Spurs will come together on. One important note about Parker is that he is an unrestricted free agent, giving him the option of re-signing in San Antonio if they want him back, or signing wherever he wants, within any of the other 29 NBA teams. That's his choice. The Spurs have no control over that. LaMarcus Aldridge is on a guaranteed contract next season for $22.3 million. Kawhi Leonard, we obviously know his name's in the trade rumor mill, but until he does get traded, or if he doesn't get traded, then his contract for now is at $20 million for next season. That doesn't change anything for now. So we don't know, if the Spurs and his side they work things out. Well, then obviously he stays on the Spurs' roster. If they don't and they do want to move him, we don't know exactly what kind of deal they're getting back for him just yet. If it's for like younger players and that trading team's taking Kawhi into their cap space, well then San Antonio would their team salary go down a little bit. If they're kind of matching salaries with whoever that trading partner is, well then the Spurs' cap situation probably stays close to the same, which means they're operating above the cap. So we'll kind of continue to monitor the Kawhi situation. Pau Gasol is on a guaranteed contract next season for $16.8 million. Patty Mills is also under a guaranteed contract for $11.5 million. Rudy Gay, even though he opted out of his player option and he is an unrestricted free agent like Parker, means he can sign wherever he wants. The Spurs do have the option of bringing him back as long as, with that cap hold of $10 million, as long as they keep it there and they don't renounce it. So let's say that Gay goes into the free agent meetings and he doesn't find a contract that suits him, and he ends up wanting to come back to San Antonio. Well, as long as they haven't used this, they haven't renounced this cap hold of $10 million, well then they can work with Gay on up to a 4-year deal if they wanted to using this cap hold. They could also re-sign him using one of these exceptions, the mid-level or biannual exception. Now, let's just say that Gay does sign elsewhere. The minute he signs his new contract with another team, his cap hold completely disappears from the Spurs' salary sheet. So that's kind of where Rudy Gay's options stand right now. We'll continue to monitor his free agency over at Project Spurs. Danny Green has a guaranteed deal of $10 million. Kyle Anderson, Brent Forbes, and Davis Bertans, they are all restricted free agents, as well as Darren Hilliard. So I'm going to kind of go through how restricted free agency works. First with Kyle. He has a qualifying offer, cap hold of $6.4 million with the Spurs. He has three choices here. He can sign their $4.7 million qualifying offer. And if he does that, well, then he's on their books next season for $4.7 million. And the following summer, he would have the choice of becoming an unrestricted free agent in 2019, or he would be an unrestricted free agent, should I say. Now, Kyle could also go seek offer sheets elsewhere. So if a team wanted to give Kyle an offer sheet, it has to be at minimum 2 years and maximum 4 years. And that offer sheet could be up to his max because the Spurs do have early bird free agents and he was a first-round pick. So then, let's say he signs an offer sheet with Team X. Well, then after July 6th, Kyle's that offer sheet comes to the Spurs, and the Spurs have two choices. They can either match the offer sheet, whatever the terms are, and then they keep Kyle on their books for the length of that contract, or they can decline to match it, and then he's now signed to that other team, whoever that team is that offered him the offer sheet. Kyle can also be re-signed with the Spurs. If they wanted to rescind the qualifying offer, they can just use his bird rights to work a deal with him, a long-term deal, up to whatever both sides agree to. And if they wanted to, they could also re-sign him using one of their mid-level or biannual exceptions if they wanted to use those to re-sign Kyle. So that's how Kyle works with his restricted free agency. The mid-level and biannual exception, as I mentioned, they can be used to sign outside free agents, or they can be used to re-sign some of the Spurs' own free agents. Manu Ginobili has a guaranteed contract of $2.5 million. Now, obviously, we don't know if he's going to retire or stay with the Spurs next season. So for now, just because of where the numbers say we're going to project that he's back on the contract. If he does retire, they have the choice of stretching that contract out over a few years if they wanted to. So we'll kind of monitor what happens with Manu as the summer continues. Lonnie Walker IV, he will be earning $2.3 million next season. So once he signs that contract officially after July 1st, well then that cap hole will disappear and it'll just be his guaranteed amount. Tim Duncan, he still has. This is the last year that the Spurs are getting hit from his retirement in terms of that $1.8 million contract that was stretched. So Timmy's still on the books as far as being a retired player next season for $1.8 million. Bryn Forbes and Davis Bertans, like I mentioned, they are both restricted free agents just like Kyle Anderson, so they can both accept the Spurs' qualifying offer of $1.6 million, return to San Antonio for a season, then become unrestricted free agents next year. They can seek offer sheets elsewhere, or of course the Spurs can rescind those qualifying offers and use their early bird rights to re-sign them to long-term deals. Now, one area where they do differ from Kyle Anderson is that they are both under what we call the Arenas rule, because they've only played 2 years in the NBA and they weren't first-round draft picks. So how does that work as far as them being Arenas free agents? This means that any offer sheet given to them from an opposing team needs to be in year one at maximum $8.5 million. So the most a team can offer them is that $8.5 million mid-level exception in year one of that new contract. And then, of course, the Spurs would have the choice to either match it after 48 hours or decline to match it, and they'd sign with that other team. The Spurs can also rescind their qualifying offers and sign them both to long-term deals, like as I mentioned, or use the exceptions to sign them. So we'll kind of monitor where Forbes and Bertans end up going. There's already been reports that the Utah Jazz and the Brooklyn Nets are going to have interest in Davis Bertans. Nikola Milutinov, he has a $1.6 million cap hold until the Spurs and his side figure out what's going to happen with him. San Antonio has up until July 20th to buy out his contract with Olympiacos. Now, if they were to buy out his contract, which is reportedly for $900,000, well then Milutinov can either sign with San Antonio using his cap hold, or the Spurs would have to sign him to the veteran minimum or one of these exceptions that they have, the mid-level or the biannual exception. We'll kind of continue to monitor Milutinov. If the Spurs and his side figure out that he's going to stay overseas another season, well, then they can just inform the NBA through writing that he's staying overseas with Olympiacos, and then his cap hold would disappear from their books for this coming season. Derek White is on a guaranteed contract of $1.6 million. I already went through Laverne. DeJounte Murray has a guaranteed contract of $1.5 million next season. David Lee's retired, so we've obviously renounced his cap hold there. Brandon Paul, he's on a non-guaranteed contract up until August 1st. So basically this just means that if he stays on the Spurs roster past August 1st, then his $1.3 million contract becomes fully guaranteed for next season. So there's still some time for the Spurs to decide what's going to happen with Paul in terms of if they want to keep him on the roster for next season. The last player is Darren Hilliard. He's under what we call a two-way restricted free agency. So his free agency is a little similar to Bertans and Kyle, where he can go seek offer sheets from opposing teams, and if the Spurs match the offer sheet, whatever the terms are, well then he becomes a full NBA player on their roster for next season. if they decline to match the offer sheet, well then he will be with that other team, with that whatever the opposing team is that signed him to. He'll be a full NBA player there. Now, if he accepts the Spurs' $1.3 million qualifying offer, well then that amount turns into $77,000, and he ends up staying in the G League as a two-way player. Well, I mean, part of the NBA and the G League as a two-way player next year, and then his salary will get erased from the Spurs' books for this coming season because it's under that two-way structure. So the last choice they have with Hilliard also is they can also convert his two-way contract into an NBA contract if they wanted to. So that's kind of where the Spurs stand heading into free agency on July 1st. They're going to be a team operating over the cap we project right now. Obviously, if any trades, the only way that they're going to have any kind of real cap space is if they move one of these big contracts, whether that's like Kawhi, Pau Gasol, Patty Mills, or Danny Green. Right now, they're projected just to operate over the salary cap and use one of those non-tax mid-level exceptions of $8.5 million or the biannual exception of $3.3 million to upgrade their team. So for ProjectSpurs.com, I am Paul Garcia.